Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Andrew Friedson, and I am the president of the County Council, and I chair the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee meeting. We're here tonight for a listening session to talk about the recommendations that have come forward from the Planning Board on attainable housing strategies. I want to reiterate that there's no legislation that's currently before the County Council. We have the recommendations that have come before the planning, that come from the Planning Board to the County Council. The County Council held 3 work sessions in the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee to hear about the recommendations over the course of the summer. And now we're engaging in community listening sessions like the one we're having tonight. We had 2 last week, one in Silver Spring and one in Wheaton. We have more coming up next week, and we have a virtual one as well. So we really appreciate you joining us tonight. We're here more for listening than for talking, so we're going to try to limit the talking to the greatest extent that we can. I'm sure that there'll be a number of questions that are asked, which will require quite a bit of follow-up, and so we're going to be taking notes. We have staff here to take notes, and for the council and for the planning department to look into some of the issues that are raised and concerns that come up. Joining us tonight is Chris Wilhelm, the Chief of Staff for Councilmember Ring. She regrets the fact that she couldn't make it here tonight. Unfortunately, she is under the weather, but her Chief of Staff is here. He'll stay the whole time and is taking notes and has provided his contact information to you and wanted me to reiterate that they are scheduling meetings at community association meetings in their district to have some follow-up on some of the things that come up tonight. I wanted to acknowledge Councilmember Evan Glass, who represents at large, who's here, has joined us as well, and has joined a couple of these listening sessions as well, and is here as I am to listen to you. We have our Planning Board Chair, Artie Harris, you're going to hear from in a moment, as well as Planning Director Jason Sartori, who's going to give some information at the outset with a brief PowerPoint to explain the recommendations and the rationale behind them before we hear predominantly from you. We have Pam Luckett, who is here from Councilmember Albernaz's office, who is listening in as well, and Paul Ellis from Council Vice President Stewart's office. I want to acknowledge my teams. Cindy Gibson is here, and Warren Hansen, who helped check you in. Thank the PIO team, thank the Recreation Department team, and thank everybody for joining us. Want to reiterate why we're here. We're here to hear from you, to listen to the Planning Board's recommendations, hopefully to learn from each other, and note that this has been a multi-year process. It's not going to happen tomorrow or overnight, and so we are taking our time, and we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to get as much feedback as we possibly can. Logan Ambinder from the council staff is here, and we'll be taking down all of the questions, concerns, and comments that are raised, and we're trying our best to keep track of it. I'll also respectfully request that you check in and register as you came in, so that we have your contact information and we can send you the information that was presented here tonight, and also to have an opportunity to do follow-up as well. That's the reason for the check-in. The topic we're here to talk about tonight is about housing. We have real serious housing issues. There is a wide variety of opinions and viewpoints on the best ways to solve them. This is being proposed to us and has been presented by the Planning Department and the Planning Board as one tool in the toolkit to address it. The council has to decide what of the recommendations we take up, how, when, and under what circumstances we take them up. That's why we want to hear from you. But the reality is, we know as a council, we have committed to addressing our housing challenges, and we have been very serious about our willingness and our interest and our engagement in that. It's not an or question. It's in many ways an and question, and we're trying to figure out as many things as we can do that will help address these challenges, and to do it in as thoughtful a way as we possibly can, with as much engagement as we can. And that's really what tonight is all about. Housing has been one of my biggest issues as chair of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee. I'm not going to go into all of the things that we have done as a county and as a county council, making historic investments in affordable housing, making significant changes in laws and zoning and procedures to make affordable housing more viable and make more affordable housing happen. But we have a lot more work to do. The housing challenges are stark and something that we need to address. This is not intended to be a be-all, end-all and a panacea to solve all of the challenges. But the question is this a tool in the toolkit for us to be able to chip away at the housing challenges that we face so that more residents can afford to live in Montgomery County, and the challenge that too few people can afford to live in Montgomery County doesn't continue in the way that it has over the last couple decades. With that, we want to leave as much time as possible to hear from you. Let me turn it over very briefly to the chair of the planning board for a couple comments, and then we're going to turn it over to Director Sartori for his brief PowerPoint to discuss what we're here to talk about, and then open it up to you for questions. With that, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon and evening, and thank you, Council President Friedson. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's really important to hear your voices. So I'm Artie Harris, Chair of the Planning Board for Montgomery County. The Planning Board is an independent agency within the Maryland National Park and Planning Commission, also called MNC-PPC. The Planning Board members are appointed by the County Council. The Planning Board incorporates community input and the expertise of Montgomery Planning and Montgomery Parks to make independent and informed decisions that will enhance the quality of life within our neighborhoods. We are guided by our new general plan, Montgomery Thrive 2050. A core theme is more housing of all types for all people. In June, the board approved and transmitted to the County Council the Attainable Housing Strategies. As President Friedson said, it is just one of the tools we can use to help address a big housing shortage in our county. We are not building enough housing fast enough to keep up with demand or anticipated growth. This crisis threatens our economic viability and quality of life. Our missing middle is shrinking. 26,000 middle income earners have left the county since about 2005. They are moving outside the county to places with more affordable and attainable housing, or families are simply not moving to our county at all. This includes teachers, firefighters, nurses, and even our own children and grandchildren who want to build their careers and start families in Montgomery County, but can't find housing here. We can do better. Attainable housing strategies alone won't solve our housing problems, but can help by allowing more flexibility to build more housing and specifically more types of housing along our county's major corridors. These proposals address the county's urgent need for housing, especially for people and families who have too much income to qualify for affordability programs, but still struggle to afford to live in Montgomery County. To be clear, this is not a mandate for people to turn their properties into duplexes. It will simply provide property owners a path to build something else aligned with their community's existing character and give people more options to stay here. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to,
Before we turn it over to Director Sartori, a couple of housekeeping notes. There are snacks in the back and water, so please grab as you need and see fit. Also wanted to acknowledge and appreciate that Jeru Bende is here from the county executive, as well as Claire Isley. So thank you for joining us on behalf of the county executive and for all of your work here in this community. With that, let me turn it over to Director Sartori to present some of the information.
Great, thank you. Good evening, I'm Jason Sartori. I'm the director of the county's planning department. And before I begin talking about attainable housing, I thought I would share with you my personal housing story As an adult, I've lived in 2 different garden-style apartments, one outside of Richmond, Virginia, one outside of Providence, Rhode Island. I then moved to a small apartment building that had 6 rental units in it in Somerville, Massachusetts, just outside of Cambridge in Boston. And then moved to downtown Baltimore, where I lived in a high-rise apartment building right in the heart of downtown. Before my wife and I moved to Montgomery County in 2002, we bought a townhouse in Silver Spring, just by the Forest Glen Metro Station. And then about 7 years later, we bought a single-family detached home in Bethesda. So I've kind of lived as an adult in a bunch of different types and styles of housing. As a young child, for the first 5 years of my life, my family and I lived in 2 different accessory dwelling units in New York. So I've lived in a variety of different types of housing, and that's really what this project is about, is how do we create more opportunities to get more types of different housing to meet the diverse needs of our residents. So I'll start by talking about what started this. And you can see here, this is a letter that we received at the Planning Board and the Planning Department from the County Council in March of 2021, where the Council asked the Planning Board to consider and recommend, quote, zoning reforms that would allow greater opportunities for missing middle housing in Montgomery County. The resulting project became known as Attainable Housing Strategies. One thing I would note, though, is that the thought behind the letter was that we were going to send our recommendations, the board's recommendations, to the County Council within 2 months. And here we are, about 3.5 years later. It took us a little over 3 years before we eventually sent the recommendations to the County Council. And that extra time afforded us the opportunity to talk to more people, to talk to other jurisdictions that have done similar work, to do a little bit more research, to hone the recommendations, and to do a bunch of additional community engagement and outreach over that time. So when we started, we set out 3 main goals for the effort. The first was to increase opportunities to meet the county's diverse housing supply needs. And this is where I was talking about, we have a lot of single-family homes. We have a lot of multifamily high-rise. What we don't have are the missing middle types of housing units that meet the needs of a lot of our residents or people who want to be able to live here. And so how can we create more opportunities there? The second was to unravel the exclusionary aspects of the county's single-family residential zones. And I'll show some data that get to that and how we're seeing every single neighborhood in Montgomery County is becoming more and more exclusive. And then lastly, to create more opportunities for home ownership for more households in more parts of the county. So why are we doing this now? First and foremost, not up on the screen, is the fact that we still had to fulfill our obligation to the County Council from their request from 3.5 years ago. Then also, we've got Thrive Montgomery 2050. Chair Harris talked about this. This is our new general plan that was adopted almost 2 years ago, that creates a framework and policy guidance for us to focus on diversifying our housing stock. Now, one important thing to note is that Thrive was not the first official county document to call for this. In fact, in 2011, the county approved a housing element to our old general plan. This was a requirement from the state to adopt a housing element. And that housing element included similar language about trying to add more diverse types of housing to the county. Next, many jurisdictions, including some right across the river, and even recently I've heard that Prince George's County is also considering similar types of initiatives. But jurisdictions all across the country are doing this. And they're at the state level, at the local level. We're even hearing the Biden administration and even the Harris campaign is talking about this type of changes from a housing perspective. But we're seeing it in places like Oregon, Massachusetts, Montana, Oklahoma, Texas, North Carolina, Minnesota, all over the country. Next, the county has a significant housing supply issue. I just want to talk about this one for a second because we've been hearing a lot recently about how we don't really have a supply issue because we've got over 30,000 units already approved in our development pipeline. These are unbuilt, approved development units. And that's true, we do have those there. But we recently took a closer look at that, and we actually went back 6 years. And we said, if we look at that pipeline from 6 years ago, what percentages of those were built today or are in progress of being built? It was only about 50%. The other thing that we looked at, we saw in today's, those 30,000 units, about 10,000 of those were approved more than 10 years ago. Some of these projects are never going to happen. The market changes, property changes ownership, conditions are different. For whatever reason, they may never go forward. Others will. But the other important thing to note about that pipeline is that it's almost entirely multifamily high-rise. So this project was not just about trying to get more housing, but it was about trying to get more diverse types of housing that we don't see in the county today, that create opportunities for people who can't find housing in the county today. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then lastly, there's a significant equity component to this. This is the right thing to do. The planning department approved its equity agenda for planning a few years back, and that asks us to apply an equity lens to everything we do. But it also, through this, we acknowledge the role that our plans, our policies from generations and decades ago have played in the racial segregation that we see in the county today. Attainable housing strategies provides us with the opportunity to bring down some of the barriers to housing opportunities and for people to be able to build wealth in the county, but also just to create more opportunities for disadvantaged communities, historically disadvantaged communities in the county. So I'm going to show a few sets of data that help tell the story here too. This first one, this bar chart shows the average size of single-family detached homes in the county based on the decade built. So on the left, you have the 1950s. They're averaging about 1,500, 1,600 square feet. And on the right side, you have the current decade, nearly 3,900 square feet. And we do know, and it's happening throughout the county, but we see homes that are older and smaller and lower priced are being torn down and replaced with brand new homes that are 2, 3, 4 times larger than what was there originally. So what does this mean in terms of pricing? So before I show the impact of size and whether it's detached and attached on housing price and value, I just want to highlight that in 2023, the average single-family detached home in the county sold for $970,000. In the first quarter of 2024, that was over $1 million. That's across the entire county. Meanwhile, in 2023, attached structures, so your townhouses, condos, co-ops, they sold on average for $440,000. We look at the distribution of these home sales. These blue bars show you every single home sale in 2023 of a single family detached, and you can see they tend to be on the far end here. In green, we're adding townhouses, our attached units. And you can see that they start to come down. The largest percentages in the $400,000 to $500,000 price range. And then lastly, condos and co-ops, even further down on the scale. So these are smaller units, they're attached units. You see with that, it's in the largest share is in the $200,000 to $300,000 price range. These are actual home sales in Montgomery County last year. Now I want to look at this zip code, 20904. This is where I talked before about how every single neighborhood in the county is becoming more and more exclusive. This is using this as an example. In the year 2000, the typical single-family home, if you put it in terms of 2022 dollars, current dollars, it would be $361,000 in this zip code. But in reality, the current typical home is $565,000 in this zip code. So what does that mean in terms of what you need to be able to afford these different types of homes? So to get the typical home from 2000, today you would need $80,000 in annual household income. But to get the actual typical home today in this zip code, you need $126,000. This shows you the percentage of households across the entire county, not just here in the zip code, but across the entire county that can afford, that earn that much money. So In the case of the year 2000 home, 66, nearly 2/3 of county residents, county households could afford the typical home from 2000 here in the zip code. But it's actually less than half that can afford the real typical home in the zip code today. And we're seeing this change in every single zip code in the county. Some much more dramatically, some a little bit less. This is kind of in the middle there. But every single case, you can't find a single zip code in the county where it's more affordable, more attainable. We're saying this is what we need to address, this move towards every neighborhood becoming less and less attainable to households who want to live in Montgomery County. And that leads to the 26,000 middle income residents that we're seeing leave Montgomery County. So what are we proposing? On the left is what you can do today. In a single family neighborhood, you can tear down a house that you own. Don't go tear down someone else's house. But you could tear down your house and replace it with this large single family home. The only thing you can build is another single family home. What you can't build is the building on the right, which is the same exact size, same massing, same height, same setback from the road, same setback from the neighbor properties. It just happens to be 2 units. You can't do that today. So I'll show a few maps that get to some of the geographies that I'll mention. Everything that you see here in various shades of yellow are the single family zones that we're talking about tonight with these recommendations. So the darkest are the R40. I don't know, you can see there's some here around Wheaton and some down here by Tacoma Park. That's the smallest lot size, typical lot size that we have. Then you got R60 in the next shade, lighter shade, then R90 starts to spread out a little bit more, and then R200 are the lightest yellows, so it's a little bit more spread out. Just high level, I'll just say everything here in yellow is where the planning board has recommended allowing duplexes by right. So the same process that you could follow today, if you were to tear down a single family home and replace it with another single family home, you could do it under the board's recommendations in all of the areas in yellow to build a duplex. I'll get more into the details in a bit. The next map shows these are the Thrive Montgomery 2050 growth corridors. These are the growth corridors that we talk about in this in our recommendations here. These are not corridors that were identified through attainable housing. These were identified and approved as the areas where the county wants to see growth going over the next couple of decades along these corridors primarily through the Thrive approval process. Next, the priority housing district. This kind of combines the last 2 maps. So when I talk about the priority housing district, these are areas that are 1 mile straight line buffer, so a 1 mile radius around our metro stations, Purple Line stations, and MARC rail stations, where you have one of those 4 zones that I mentioned. And then 500 feet from each of the corridors. So I'll talk about the implications of these in a sec. So the recommendations that the board made have 3 different scales of development with 3 different methods and kind of approaches to them, and then 3 different geographic targets. The small scale, this is where we're talking about the duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. Things that are similar in size to existing, what you can build today as a single family home in single family neighborhoods. There would be no changes under the board's recommendations to height restrictions, setback requirements, or lot coverage requirements or limits. It would apply, you would allow, the board would recommends allowing duplexes and triplexes everywhere in the R40, R60, and R90 zones. And in that priority housing district, that map with the blue, allowing quadplexes within those areas. That's a 4-unit building. In the R200 zone, the one that was the lightest yellow area furthest out, duplexes everywhere, and then triplexes and quadplexes only within that priority housing district. The key thing here is that it would be allowed by right, meaning you could go to the Department of Permitting Services, get a demolition permit if you have an existing building, a home there, and then you can get a building permit to build your duplex or triplex or however. However, one little caveat, it would have to be in conformance with what we're calling a pattern book. The pattern book would demonstrate it's really a visual representation of the requirements of the zoning code. So it shows how on a typical lot, and the pattern book would have different types of lots, different shaped lots, different sizes for the different zones. But it would show you how you could lay out a duplex, triplex, quadplex, accommodate parking on site, what the massing of it would look like, some neighborly house details, how you could accommodate on this, a porch, a sunroom, things like that, and the frontage design, how it communicates with the street that it's on. Next is the medium scale. For medium scale, the planning board recommended this is, your townhouses, stacked flats. This is where you might have two, they are also called 2-over-2s. So a 2-story unit over another 2-story unit. These are some potentially small apartments. These are 3 to 4 stories tall. The focus here is along those Thrive growth corridors. This only applies under the board's recommendations in the R60 and R90 zones. In those zones, within 500 feet of the corridors, you could file an application that would go through a full review. This would not be by right. It would go through a review, potentially even going before the planning board under an optional method of development. We have optional methods of development today where we allow increased density in exchange for some public benefit or good. In this case, the public benefit is smaller units that are more affordable. So what we're talking about with this is having a starting point, an average unit size of 1,500 square feet. And the smaller that average unit size goes for the project you're proposing, the more units you can get and the more density you can get. So this is where we're talking about trying to get smaller units that will be more attainable. And this is right on the corridors where we have access to transit and other forms of transportation as well. And then lastly, there's the large scale. This is where we're talking about larger townhouses, larger apartments. And here we're primarily, entirely focused around our corridors, but only certain segments of the corridors. They're not pre-identified sections. This is where we would do this through a master plan process. What we envision here is something that requires a whole new set of zones that don't exist today, that help us realize the type of development we want to see focused on our corridors where we do have easy access to transit and other amenities within walking distance. And so the proposal here is to develop a new set of zones that could be applied through a master plan process to certain segments of our corridors. One other thing I want to mention is parking. So with that priority housing district, that map showing the blue along the corridors, this comes into play with the amount of parking that would be required, the minimum number of parking spaces that would be required. Today, it's 2 spaces per unit. So if you could build a duplex, you would be required to have 4 on-site, off-street, on-site parking spaces for those 2 units. The recommendation from the planning board says outside the priority housing district, if there's no street parking, we're going to keep that the same. You still have to build 4 for that duplex. But if there is street parking present, then the minimum required would be cut in half. You would only have to build 2. Doesn't mean that you can't build more. You can, but you wouldn't have to. If it's inside the priority housing district and there's no parking present, again, this is where we're focused on our corridors and we have access to other forms of transportation. There, with no street parking present, a 50% reduction. And if there is street parking present, then a 75% reduction, meaning the duplex would only be required to have 1 parking space. So as Council President Friedson mentioned, we're doing a number of these. We're here tonight, the 17th. Next week, we have 2, one on Monday, one on Wednesday. Mondays is at Germantown, and Wednesdays in Bethesda. And then we have one virtual one that'll be in the middle of the day on October 2nd. And one other event that I want to highlight coming up this Thursday, 2 days from now, the Planning Board has been holding a speaker series on housing. And this Thursday at our headquarters in Wheaton, we're hosting a panel with people from St. Paul, Minnesota, Oregon, and then Arlington County across the river to come and talk about exactly the work that they've done in this exact arena. So I encourage people to come on out to our Wheaton headquarters, right at the corner of Reedy and Georgia and Veers Mill there. And if you can't, we'll be broadcasting it live, and it'll also be available on demand for people to watch. With that, I think we're ready to turn to questions. Oh, one thing I will highlight, this QR code, if you scan that, it'll bring you to the presentation I just gave so that you have that available to you.
So you can take a picture of the QR code and it will show up on your phone if you have a phone with you. If not, if you registered and signed up, we will email it to you, and we do have some paper copies in the back. Reminder, there is water and snacks in the back. We're going to turn it to questions. Marcella, who is here, she has a microphone and will come over. If you could raise your hand. We would ask that if you've attended another event and have already asked a question, if you could first allow those who have not to ask their questions. And this has generally worked in other sessions, but we would ask that you keep your question or comment to as close to 30 seconds as possible so we can hear from as many people as possible. With that, Marcella, let's turn it to the questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you're holding the mic. Okay. My concern is that when you do this master plan and create zones that can pretty much do anything, how does that impact me as a homeowner who purchased my home in a single family neighborhood? You change the whole dynamic of where I live. I don't think that's fair to us who are paying taxes in Montgomery County. I don't understand why it has to be residential neighborhoods when there's so many commercial areas that are unused. I mean, right here on 29, you still have that, was it the Washington Post building over there? All of these things are available for development, but you have to do a master plan, spend money on a master plan to redesign all of Montgomery County. I don't understand how that, makes sense.
Okay, so I just, one thing I will highlight is, again, our recognition that this is just one tool in our toolbox to address the diverse housing needs that we have. But the other thing I want to highlight is that there's nothing that requires any individual homeowner to do anything with this. It just increases the number of opportunities that a homeowner has. The other, with the recommendations the board has made, the idea is to keep it within the existing massing and size that you can build a single family home today. So from a size perspective, a duplex would be the same structure and size. I showed that picture of the same exact building, really, we photoshopped it, keeping it the same.
But it's not the same. It's not the same. You're saying that, okay, in my house now can house like 15 people from 15 different families. So
We'll go to the next question. Thank you.
Finish the question.
We kindly ask that everyone is respectful. We want to hear from as many people as possible this evening.
So again, it's not the same. What you're saying is, I'm in my house with my family, but you can allow 15 people in one house next door with a bunch of cars and whatever else is going on next door, even though I purchased my property thinking I was going to be in a single family neighborhood.
Thank you. Next question.
Well, I guess it sounds like I'm in the minority here. I want to commend the council for putting this forward. I'm here on behalf of my children, young professionals who want to. I spent 30 years in Kensington, Parkwood. Just to give you an example, when we bought our house 30 years ago, $250,000 seemed like a ton of money then. The average now is $2 million in that neighborhood. In fact, 3 of the 10 houses there are $2.3 million, and there's 7 bedrooms. It's absurd. And young professionals who want to live close in cannot find a house. And I understand every neighborhood is different. So I just want to register having been the owner of a single family home in the Parkwood neighborhood, close in, totally support this, not for me, and I understand concerns that other people have, but for the young professionals out there, like I was 30 years ago, trying to find a starter home, and they do not exist in a form that's affordable. And that graphic that you put up is fantastic, because the houses going up now, 5,000-6,000 square feet, look like apartment buildings, except they're tear downs and they're single family homes. So thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
This may be a naive question because I have no idea how the zoning board works, but we've been in our neighborhood for 30 years and we've seen all the little starter homes converted to big houses, some of which go for like $1 million. Where's the zoning people been for restricting that sort of development in these established neighborhoods? I mean, why haven't, yeah, what will this do to address that? I mean, like the height requirements and lot, how much of a lot you can take up? You know, why haven't there been restrictions on that to save these starter homes all these years?
Yeah, there are restrictions on that. I think what Jason was mentioning earlier as part of the recommendations is that the same restrictions that exist for a tear down would exist under this proposal. The difference is, rather than it being one really, really big house for one family, it could be, in their recommendation, which is not legislation, it's not before the council yet, but a duplex, which would be 2 homes in that same footprint, or potentially 3, if it's a duplex or a triplex. So there are restrictions for the lot coverage, there are restrictions for the height, but within those restrictions, you can turn a relatively modest home that was probably built in the 40s or 50s or 60s in many neighborhoods around Montgomery County. We were building a lot of new homes, and those are being torn down. About 200 a year in Montgomery County are torn down. And the question is, when it is torn down, what can be built in its place? And that is, on the small scale side of this recommendation, of the 3 recommendations, that is what is attempting to be addressed here. Again, we have lots of questions. That's why we're here to hear your questions and concerns, but that is at the heart of the small scale recommendation. When those 200 or so homes a year are torn down, what can be built in its place, and who is it serving?
But what's being done to save those small homes that are left? Nothing.
Well, one other thing, when we talk about restrictions, I just want to highlight that what we have today is ultra restrictive, because the only thing you can build is that single family home. And so this is creating more opportunities.
It's like 3 times the square footage, though.
Right. And so what this would allow is for that same thing that you could build now could be 3 units that are much smaller, that would be more attainable than the single family home that could be built today. I understand the concern about allowing those, but you know, the more restrictive you become with the zoning, the less activity, the less that you're going to have in terms of, you know, the more unaffordable each neighborhood will continue to become.
I'm just going to respond to the last piece just quickly, and then we can move on to the next question. The goal here isn't to be in a debate. It's to hear concerns and questions. But just to clarify the point that you asked earlier, there is a limitation to what the county can do in terms of our restrictions before we are property taking. Someone doesn't own the structure on their property, they own their property. And what they do on their property can be restricted within certain limitations. And those limitations are limited. So we can limit a property owner up to a certain point, but only up to a certain point until we get to the point where we have exceeded our authority as a local government to put in land use regulations. And so the issue at hand here is, at what point have we exhausted our efforts to restrict what can be done on a property and what can be built in its place? So in this case, it's not only are there restrictions on on where and how you can build, there has been a restriction on what you can build. You can build a single family home. And the question is, should there be a broadening of what you're allowed to build within the restrictions that exist?
Next question. Can you please stand up?
So it's a three-part question. Mr. Perrone, I'd like to know what changes you're going to make in your neighborhood with regard to this proposal. Second thing is, can you please address the income levels alongside housing costs? You gave the increasing costs for homes. You didn't address what the average income levels were for people coming into this part of the county. And then finally, how about corporate responsibility, particularly with Verizon and a large parcel of land that remains vacant along with that huge structure that for the past 15 years, there's been no activity there. How about some affordable housing being built in that area? Thank you.
I will just respond real quickly that everything that I've talked about tonight applies in my neighborhood where I live as well. We try to not isolate certain neighborhoods to take on, the burden of our housing crisis. It's something that we need to bear, collectively as a county.
Hi, my name is Reverend Kristen Schmidt. I'm the senior minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Silver Spring, which is just over on New Hampshire Avenue. And I also am a resident of Olney, and I grew up in Wheaton. So I am from Montgomery County. I had two questions. First, it occurs to me that listening sessions like these are likely to attract people who already own homes. And so I'm curious what efforts the council is making to gather feedback from people who are not on the housing ladder yet and who would stand to benefit from this being put into action.
Yeah, up to this point, this has been really a planning department effort, so we can, I'm going to turn to the planning department on that. Herein lies one of the many challenges that we face in any land use decision policy that we have, and trying to be as intentional in our outreach as possible. We've done a lot in that regard in recent years, but obviously there's always more work for us to do. We try to be intentional, not just who's in the room, but who's not in the room, and being thoughtful of that. We have a responsibility to serve everybody. But let me turn it to Jason to talk about what planning has done and intends to do with this particular proposal and more broadly.
Sure. I would say in all that we do, we try to reach out to as many people and as diverse a population as possible. And it's through partnerships with churches and other faith-based organizations and other community organizations that we're able to connect to a lot of those communities. Also, with some of our master planning efforts, we'll do canvassing and go door to door in apartment buildings. With this, we haven't done specifically that, but we will welcome opportunities to partner and to help spread the word of what we're doing amongst more people. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And I too want to commend the council for undertaking, this work. I think this is incredibly important. My children are 9, 10, and 12, but eventually they are going to fly the nest one day, and I really want them to be able to afford to live where they grew up and hopefully live close to me. The other question that I had was I understand the desire not to create additional zoning burdens, but I hear the concern in the room about what it is like to change the character of a neighborhood by changing sort of the makeup of the homes and who's in the home, et cetera. But I guess this dovetails into a larger question I had about this work, which is, how many of these homes are we hoping will be rented homes, and how many of these homes do we hope will be purchasable homes? Because I think we all know that the way the economy is structured in this country, being able to purchase a home is a huge step toward gaining generational wealth for families. And I wonder if it's worth considering some sort of zoning limitation in existing single-family neighborhoods that, if on a plot of land that today would only be able to have a single family home if there were a limitation that said if you build a home, a duplex or a triplex on that same property, that would say those have to be homes that are sold, because homes that are bought are less likely to see that much turnover and people have more of an investment in their community. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we'd have to look into the legal restrictions that we would have on what someone could do with their property, forcing somebody to sell or not to sell, or to rent or not to rent is a dicey legal area for us in terms of property rights. But I appreciate the sentiment behind the question, and it's definitely something for us to explore further.
Hi, I also am a lifelong Montgomery County resident, and I have lived through mansionization, which is awful. It's awful because the house next door to me towered over my little small house. At the time in 2000, Nancy Florine told me that the big house was the highest and best use of the neighboring property. And I thought at the time, no, it would be better to have two houses on that lot. So it's not that I'm opposed to the idea of multifamily houses on single family lots, but I am very concerned about the health of neighborhoods and the impact on people's sanity, quite frankly, because this will create a huge pressure on single-family houses that there will be people trying to buy up houses and trying to make as much money, and it will be a huge pressure, even more than the mansionization pressure in my old neighborhood. The CDC has a lot on how neighborhood communities are very important to people's health and length of life. So I feel like the county might be taking away some of the years of my life. The FEMA tells me that in the case of an emergency, your neighbors are your first responders, and I'm wondering how the county council is going to be working to build up neighborhoods. So I do have one suggestion, which is come up with some sort of loan and tax incentives so that neighborhoods can pool together and take agency and do this themselves instead of waiting for other people to come in and do it in a way that might not be better for us.
Thank you for your comments.
Appreciate
Next
the suggestion.
question.
Oh, okay. I sympathize with the first speaker. A lot of people live in single-family homes in neighborhoods that they chose. I've been in my house 33 years. It's a quiet neighborhood. Love my neighbors. They've all been there a long time. I've kept my home up, put a lot of money into it. And my neighbor Lori might be moving for a job. And under this regime, I would now she would sell to a developer maybe, who wants to put an apartment building next door. Well, what happened to my neighborhood? What happens to the value of my home? I almost feel like that's a government taking. And we live in the neighborhoods we live in because we like them. And it's almost like, well, there's a new sheriff in town and you can't have that anymore.
Thank you for your comments. Next person.
Before this, do you want to just respond to the specific example of that neighborhood and how that relates to the recommendations? Because this is an important clarification, I think, of what the recommendations are, just to make sure that we're all talking about and asking questions and giving suggestions on what's before us.
Sure, I think you're referencing the apartment reference. Yeah, that what we're recommending would be, depending on how close you are to the corridor, it would just be a duplex or a triplex, possibly a quadplex. Nothing, your neighbor couldn't tear down and build an apartment building with 5 or more units.
I don't make a great distinction in whether it's 2, 3, or 4 families in there. I know it's not going to be an apartment building the way you conventionally think of an apartment building, but 4 apartments next door?
Next question.
Hi, I'm Marlene Salisbury. I'm the HOA in my neighborhood in Olney, Maryland, Forest Crossing. I'm a 50-year resident of Montgomery County. Some great points have been made tonight. Again, I'll sympathize with the first speaker. I'm strongly against this proposal. First and foremost, it is appalling to me that a group of less than a dozen people can vote for this county. Why isn't this on a ballot? Furthermore, I can also sympathize with the folks that have kids that want to live in this county. As a toddler, I grew up in Miami, Florida. I'd love to live in that house that I grew up in. I can't afford it. It's almost $2 million. I love Olney. I purchased a home. I've lived in 4 different homes in Olney. In each development, we had a master plan and we had an HOA. If I paint my door dolphin blue, someone's going to write up a covenant violation against me. And I'm going to pay $250 until I change it. What you're proposing is that you can come into all these neighborhoods and change what we bought into. I paid $610,000 for my house in 2011. I worked 2 jobs to get it. How dare you come into our towns and change this? There's been not one comment about the infrastructure of Montgomery County. There are 1 million people here. Nothing about the roads. I commute from Olney, Georgia Avenue. I take 16th Street to 15th Street in DC. That's where I work. Do you know what that commute's like? What's it going to be like when you bring 200,000 more people here? How about a hospital? When's the last time somebody sat in an emergency room and waited 3 hours? We don't have the hospitals. I have a niece at Quince Orchard teaching. Just 36 kids in her class. We don't have the schools. Big deal when I moved in, stormwater management. That hasn't been talked about. How about the roads? I mean, this is not planned well. To me, it's like somebody's chasing a buck. You want to cram in as many homes as you can. Okay, and I don't mean any disrespect. I know you're working hard. I've spoken with Evan locally in our Olney division of GOCA, Greater Olney Civic Association. I've spoken with Lisa. We've brought up Arlington County. Arlington's right up the road. I worked there for 4 years in Crystal City. It's got 230,000 people, not 1 million. Again, I'll back down. But
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Next person.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, sorry. Rob Goldman. I'm with Montgomery Housing Partnership. Very supportive of this effort and appreciate the Planning Board's effort on this. This is part of what we passed as our vision for Thrive, and now we're in the implementation stage. And to me, it's about how do we implement this in a way that works. My daughter is a school teacher in Wheaton, and I don't know how she'll live here in the county she grew up in without a super long commute or something to be able to go to work. And we're, essentially as a county, we're built out, right? If we're going to grow as a county, it's going to be infill housing. And so, one question, so since we're about questions, I will ask a question. I'm supportive of the effort, but I would like to know if there's maybe incentives or requirements that we could implement that would create even greater affordability for these units. Thank you.
So I'll just say on that, one of the things the planning board recommended is that we monitor this to get a sense of, well, how much is actually coming as a result of it. So that would give us an opportunity to get a sense of what, after 2 years, 4 years, what are we seeing being built? How many tear downs are still being single family homes? How many are becoming duplexes, triplexes? What is the price range on all of those? Kind of monitor all of that so that we can see what additional changes need to be made or to potentially incentivize it in certain areas or certain ways or however. But for initially, we just don't have, the zoning doesn't allow any of this. So we need to start by updating the zoning to allow it.
Okay, can you stand up?
I want to drill down on the issue of parking. I live in the Four Corners section of Montgomery County, kind of ground zero of University Boulevard and Route 29, already incredibly congested traffic-wise. So this will be a priority housing district. You suggest significantly reducing parking requirements. If you walk down Sutherland Road or Timberwood Avenue, you would see there's no parking. But I think under this proposal, it would be counted as having on-street parking, but it's all parked up. Very small lots, very small houses. And that's before you expand with quadplexes, which would be allowed in this particular area, and triplexes. And that alone will create a great deal of friction among neighbors at incremental cost to a developer. I think the report said $7,000 per car for driveway space. And I just think it's not thought through. I mean, we do live in single family or residential, let's just call them residential communities. You can plan for density, but you also need to plan for quality of life.
Thank you. Next person.
Parking is something that's come up a lot, as you can imagine. It's something we're going to have to grapple with as the council thinks through and takes up the recommendations, which again, there's no legislation before us. These are just the recommendations of the planning department, but I appreciate the comments.
Hi, I would like to expand on some of the infrastructure questions that have been raised. People have talked about roads and parking. Those are very valid. In addition, though, there is a question of the utility infrastructure. I live in an older development. It's considered non-conforming lots. They're only 5,000 square feet, although the document said that we could fit a triplex on that with a driveway or driveways for enough. So, but, our street has been torn up almost every summer, several times in the summer, because the gas line, the workers tell us, is so old, it should have been replaced 25 years ago. So there's gas infrastructure. Then there's like tons of telephone poles because everybody's got cable and everything else. So there's a lot of, if you have 3 residences where you now have 1, you're going to have triple that requirement. We already have inadequate tree cover because everybody keeps cutting down the large trees. I have as many trees on my property as I can fit in 5,000 square feet, but most people don't. And when you have, and the document did not address, it just said that stormwater management and tree canopy cover were something that ought to be considered. Well, there needs to be a plan for it or it's not going to happen. There are many, already there are many houses that I could point out to anybody who's interested where the entire lot is either paved over or covered with structure. Now, maybe that's not legal, but it's happening. And it's happening just a few blocks from me already without any of these new zoning changes. I think that it should not be permissible now to have like a mega mansion and cut down every tree on the lot, but that's in fact what happens. And that isn't going to change. It's going to accelerate under this. And I'm very concerned about all those infrastructure problems, about the stormwater, about the tree canopy. Thank you.
Appreciate it. I want to reiterate, we're here to hear your feedback. We appreciate your feedback. The stormwater and the other infrastructure issues are things that we have heard. The question of non-conforming lots has also come up, which is something that we're going to have to grapple with. Right now, we have just the recommendations that are before us from the planning department. Some of the things that you talked about are the very issues that we're going to have to grapple with as we take up and if and when we take up actual legislation that is not yet before us. The purpose of tonight is to hear from you, the feedback that we're getting, which we very much appreciate.
Hi. Thank you for doing this tonight. I do appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I think there are certain places that duplexes, triplexes would look great. In the middle of a neighborhood, probably not. The reality is, in Bethesda, Garrett Park, Kensington, the houses are so expensive, nobody's going to buy those lots or houses that somebody might be selling to put in a duplex because they're not going to buy a $1 million, $2 million house to put in 2 $400,000 duplexes. So you sort of take away a big area of the higher priced houses anyhow. But in one of the pamphlets that you had on the table, there's a part about role of municipalities. And I have a question about, there's zoning authorities in Brookville, Poolesville, Laytonsville, Rockville, Barnesville, Gaithersburg, Washington Grove. Now, Brookville, historic and small. Poolesville, Laytonsville, Rockville, Gaithersburg are huge areas that have also Verizon-type places that could be built on. And this housing crisis could be taken care of a lot more quickly. I also have kids that I want to be able to buy a house, or young adults. You want them to have a house, whether it's a townhouse, a duplex. Some of them are really cute. But if you can't start these in big areas and you just try to slowly plop one in Four Corners or plop one in White Oak or plop one down in Olney, it's such a slow process, and all you're doing is ruining those neighborhoods instead of building nice new ones for people to enjoy and have their community. They've all come in together. They've all bought these duplexes or tris or quads together in an area where you could put in 20 or 30 or 40 all at once. Why not incentivize the developers with taxes or tax breaks? Maybe you're already doing that. Or there's all these farms. If they're not going to sell a farm to another farmer, don't let them sell it to breweries and wineries anymore. We have a gazillion. I mean, I'm not against going to a winery, but I don't think that's a crisis right now. I think housing's a crisis. So maybe rezone those areas that the farmers need to sell to attainable housing. And, just some suggestions. But I do wonder why these municipalities cannot also be rezoned.
Well, you brought up two main questions. I'm going to try to respond to both of them. The first about municipalities. There's two different types at a high level of municipalities in the county. Those that have significant land use authority, of which we have no role. They're not part of this conversation. They have their own housing targets. They have their own approach to the housing issues. Gaithersburg and Rockville, examples of that. Poolesville, an example of that. Gaithersburg and Rockville are actually some of the only places where you actually do see duplexes in particular in many areas of those communities, places like Kentlands and other places where they were actually part of those communities. But we don't have a role in that. We don't have the authority to regulate those municipalities. There are municipalities within Montgomery County that don't have significant land use authority. They have the ability to, in modest ways, regulate single-family homes, meaning they can do additional setbacks, they can have certain additional requirements, and there is an open question as part of this discussion and actually as part of a broader discussion that's happening at the state level, including as part of the governor's housing package, of what those municipalities' role is in housing laws and what ability they're going to have. For instance, if something more than a single-family home is allowed in a zone within their municipal limits, do they still have those setback and stormwater and some other requirements, permitting authority, et cetera, or not? And that's a question that we've asked for clarification on. That's been part of the 3 briefings that we had at the council, and so that is something that we are trying to address and to take up. Those communities would not be exempt from this. They would very much be part of this and are in fact part of this, but there's a question of what authority would they retain that currently exists under single family standards at the state as the standards within those zones change. And that's an open question that's part of this discussion. The second part that you brought up is, why aren't we doing other things? And the answer, as I mentioned earlier, is we are doing other things. In fact, we're doing more and have done more in the last 6 years since I joined the council than has probably ever been done in the history of the county, and it's not particularly close. We have a $100 million housing production fund that we helped to start. We have a nonprofit pilot fund, which MHP, you heard from Rob Goldman earlier, Montgomery Housing Partnerships, which are one of our largest affordable housing providers, they're part of that. We changed our right of first refusal bill to make it easier for partners to be able to buy a property that's on the private market and retain it for affordability. We just launched a $50 million nonprofit preservation fund that many of us have been working on for the past 3 years to partner with our nonprofit providers to retain as much of our naturally occurring affordable housing in the county as possible. I could go on and on and on. We put $163 million in this year's budget, which is a historic level of affordable housing investment to provide direct funding for affordable housing projects. So it's not that we're not doing other things. We're doing a ton of other things, and I could literally sit here for 2 hours and talk about some of the other things that we're doing. The question is, what can we do to address the challenge that we face? And the magnitude of the challenge that we face is huge, and we need as many tools in the toolkit as possible. And the question is, could this be one of those tools in the toolkit?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeremiah Pope, and I've been living in the Hillendale area of the eastern part of the county for the last 17 years. I remember when my wife and I decided to move into this part of the county to be able to afford it back those days. We had to not go on too many dates, which she didn't like that. But to this day and time, I do understand. I have a 9-year-old son, right? So I do understand the fact that we do need more housing, right? So when my son eventually grows up, like most kids are, they're going to probably want to be able to afford to live here in this area. So I think we can all agree that we need more housing. But my question I have is, because you guys did not touch on it, is what happens to the Black and brown population who struggle just like myself and like my wife, who work multiple jobs to be able to afford to move into Montgomery County? And I noticed on the screen that you had it where a lot of these corridors are in particularly Black and brown neighborhoods. So to make it a long conversation short is, what are you going to do to make sure that gentrification does not happen? Because we don't want to see people get displaced when you say that we want to build more housing. And I know no developer is going to build a cheap unit. I think the young lady hit on that. And so how can we ensure that people are not displaced, particularly Black and brown folks? Because that's my biggest concern, is that we're talking about we want people to come here, but I don't want them to be on the backs of people who've already been here for a long time and was doing the same thing like my wife and I, just struggle to make ends meet to just be able to afford to live here in the eastern part of the county.
So I really appreciate it. First, I want to say I love your shirt.
If you can't see his shirt,
Yeah.
it says, ask me how to register to vote. So ask him how to register to vote if you aren't registered to vote.
Thank you.
And there was a table for voter registration out front, so hopefully you caught that on the way in.
I just want to start by going back to the numbers about how hard it is to buy a home in every single neighborhood in our county now. Where you had to work 2 jobs before, you have to work 3 jobs now, right? So that is a huge concern, and we're trying to find ways to reverse the trend that we're seeing moving towards less and less attainability, more and more exclusivity. It's becoming that in order to be able to live in a lot of neighborhoods in the county, you need to have generational wealth. So if we can reverse that trend, I think that will help. In terms of gentrification, absolutely, it's an important issue that I think everyone can understand. We don't want to see that happen. That oftentimes happens where you have high levels of rental in communities that have been disinvested in, and then you get someone coming in and changing that. In the case of property owners, no one is going to force anyone who currently owns a home to have to leave that home or to leave it and sell to someone who's going to build a duplex or however. So we're trying to create more opportunities for people to get into that, to get into more neighborhoods and to get that home ownership so that they can start to build up that generational wealth for future generations.
Okay, one thing. So as we know from a historical standpoint, the eastern part of the county has been the part of the county that has not received any love. We all can agree with that, right?
Well, I was actually just going to mention, it's an important point. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we know most of the houses are cheaper in this part of the county. And so that's what bothers me the most, is that the displacement is going to happen in the eastern part of the county. And, I don't want to debate, but if we want to be logical, how about we try it out in the other parts of the county first? See if they like it, and then we can come back to the eastern part of the county.
Well, you brought up a really important point. This is a really important point for Montgomery County, and the planning department has a tremendous amount of research about this. Gentrification is an issue generally, but actually in Montgomery County, our main issue has been historic levels of disinvestment that has created concentrations of poverty. And this wasn't done by chance, it was done by choice, and we were trying to undo those choices. In the Thrive 2050, one of the main focuses of that was to reestablish a growth corridor in the East County that was removed, intentionally removed. And so I just think it's important for us to talk about that. If you look at the data, Silver Spring is a good example. In Silver Spring, we have upzoned Silver Spring. And what we've seen in Silver Spring is not gentrification. In fact, we've seen an increase in high-income earners, we've seen an increase in middle-class earners, and we've seen an increase in low-income earners. So there are ways to grow and to do it in a way that rises a tide that lifts all boats. And I think we need to do it in a smart and thoughtful way. I think you bring up a really important point, but the historic challenge that we've had in Montgomery County and the East County, unfortunately, has been the primary recipient negatively of the impact has been historic levels of disinvestment in large swaths of the county. And we're desperately trying to make intentional investments in the East County now and to put additional focus in the East County to try to undo that historical wrong that happened over the course of a couple decades. That's going to be hard for us to do, but that we're trying our best to do.
Next question.
We see that your proposal for heavier housing on the transit corridors seem totally unreasonable. We look at the last months that data is available, which is April and May, like in Silver Spring. We only had 2,665 riders go on between the opening of the station and 9:30 a.m. In May, it was 2,684. In Forest Glen, it was 818 and 823 in May. In Glenmont, it was 2,128. In May, it dropped down to 2,100. And in Wheaton, it went from 1,006 people in April to 863 people in May. We don't see any of this data being shown, but yet when you look at the traffic, we see that there's peak traffic on the Beltway, westbound before University Boulevard between 5 and 6 a.m. every morning, other than Fridays where very few people go to work. We have to do more for roads before we build anything additional. We don't have the capacity to add 200,000 more people with probably 100,000 more cars on our current roads. I know many people don't like to take Dale Boulevard or University Boulevard as alternates to the Beltway, but these roads can't handle it. Coming to this meeting tonight, I was put on entirely local streets, passing numerous schools to get to this meeting because the Beltway was way over capacity. Unless we build the adequate public facilities, we shouldn't be building any housing in Montgomery County.
Thank you for your comments. Next person.
Thank you for your comments.
Can you stand up, please? Yeah. Can you stand up? Thank you. I'll hold the mic.
Okay. Hi, my name is Elizabeth Joyce from Silver Spring, and I'm totally on board with Mr. Pope because we are concerned that the impact of this would be quite disproportionate throughout the county. Some areas way in the northwest of the county will not be impacted by this at all and actually have been exempted from Thrive and from this. But the big issue with this whole discussion, there is a confusion between the aspirations, which we all applaud. We all want more people to be able to live here. We all want things to be more affordable. The problem is, how is that going to happen? And the problem is that this whole planning system that you're offering is for market rate housing, not affordable housing. Whereas the majority of new residents expected to come into this county from the Council of Governments, 75% of them will have incomes of less than $50,000. So you could be doing all these great things, Mr. Friedson, but it's not enough because what this plan is going to produce is market rate housing. So I saw a clip a few days ago about a house, I forget where, maybe Kensington, that had been sold for $1.6 million, and they built 3 triplexes for $1.5 million on the same property. So how is that going to help anybody's kids? We feel horrible for the next generation. It is a result of a failure of federal, state, and local policy for 50 years. And We applaud your attempts to deal with it, but it has to be done in a fact-based way that's really going to produce results. And you need facts and data and studies to show that what you're proposing will work. And so far, I haven't seen any.
Thank you for your comments. Next person.
Hi, thank you. My name's Graham. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate all the thought and detailed analysis that the planning board put into these recommendations, and I applaud the county council for taking this up and considering these issues and taking into account the needs of future Montgomery County residents. So I hope that the council will take the needs of young folks like me into account as they consider what parts of this to adopt. I have one sort of question specifically following these issues of infrastructure and transportation that have been brought up. When I think about this, I'm interested in the potential to make actually better use of our existing multi-billion-dollar investments in transit infrastructure. We have really lucky to have great transit infrastructure in the Metro, and now we're building the Purple Line. These are multi-billion-dollar investments. So I wonder if you could just speak to how these plans could make better use of that investment.
Sure, I'll just start and say I was thinking kind of along the same lines as you as I was listening just now, that if we feel that our metro is underutilized, one way to help build that up is to concentrate more activity around them, and that includes more housing. And there have been a number of things that the council has done in recent years to try to attract more development around transit. But this is just another one of those where we focus the greatest potential density around the areas where we have that, so that we can have that kind of cohesive or just cooperation between housing and transit there.
Speaking of tax breaks, that was one of the tax breaks that we provided. Currently, metro parking lots don't provide any tax revenue, any housing, or anything really, besides oftentimes empty spaces, but sometimes storage for cars for part of the day. And so we said, if we're not getting any money from this, we're not getting any benefit from it, why don't we provide an incentive and a tax abatement for a temporary period of time to incentivize high-rise housing on metro property. And we're seeing the benefits of that. Actually, there are multiple projects in the queue, where there's going to be a ribbon cutting in the next few weeks at one metro station. There are projects underway at a few others. We're actually seeing it not just in the western part of the county, but also on the eastern side of the red line as well, where we're seeing development activity. So some of these activities do work. We have to be creative. That was controversial. We got pushback on that. We overrode a veto, in fact, but it is working, and actually other jurisdictions around the region are looking at that and considering adopting it as well.
Okay, next question. Can you stand up,
Oh,
please?
yes, sure.
Yes, I hold the mic.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And just want to, first off, thank the county council and the planning board for, trying to address the biggest issues, facing families, currently, housing and transportation costs. So really appreciate that. Been a resident of Montgomery County for 11 years, previously rented in downtown Silver Spring, as well as owned a condo. However, as my family grew, we now have 3 children, and we were looking for, a larger space. We located out and found a house, a detached single-family home out here in the 20904 zip code, which was part of the presentation. And while conducting our search for a home, there's very few parts of the county that are still affordable if you're trying to balance those kind of needs. East County being one of them, I guess, partially due to unfortunate histories and investments, but just want to say that strongly support trying to create a more diverse housing stock that has more options for families, in particular the small and medium scale housing that's proposed in the AHS is more likely to maybe be a family size. And so I guess my question is too, what more can we also do to encourage family size housing while encouraging more housing supply? So trying to tackle affordability as well as creating 2-3 bedroom units that can accommodate families.
Well, Well, I'll just quickly touch on this because it's somewhat related to this and somewhat about some of the other work that we're doing. We have really tried to incentivize 3-bedroom and family size units in a number of areas. That's something that the planning department and the planning board has been really focused on, something that the county council has been really focused on. It's been a key effort as we have taken up certain master plans. It's actually something that we're going to take up as a recommendation as part of the growth and infrastructure policy that we're taking up, which is a major policy that we take up every 4 years that's underway right now at the county council. We are in this very challenging environment. Tonight, we talked about how single-family homes have gotten huge, much bigger than are frankly needed, and much bigger than they ever have been before. The opposite has happened with the other type of housing. Apartments are getting smaller and smaller, serving single people, workers, and not families. And increasingly, as we have an affordable housing and a housing accessibility challenge in the county, that means that you have to be a family that's really, really, really wealthy or not be a family in order to have a place here. And that's not what has always made Montgomery County what it is. And that's a real challenge that we're trying to address, is that huge squeeze in the middle, which frankly is most people and most families right now. Whether this set of recommendations has got it perfectly, whether we have more work to do, whether there are a lot of other proposals, that's why we're here tonight. But that is really in many ways at the heart of the issues that we're facing at both ends of that spectrum. It's not serving the people that it needs to serve, and so we need more options to figure out how to get there.
I think I heard both presentations refer to this approach as one tool in a toolbox of others. And I think we need to hear more about what the other tools are and how they would all work together in an integrated fashion in order to solve the housing problem. I know you're early in the process, but I'd like to echo the sentiments about needing more studies to show how this could possibly help the problem, and to what extent would this tool solve a fraction of the problem, and how would the other tools work to address other aspects of it. Because the extent to which this approach is implemented is going to directly impact the adverse effects that you're hearing concerns about here. If it's a very minimal implementation, the impacts will be small.
Appreciate that. Just in terms of scale, as you heard earlier, with this at the small scale recommendation is focused on is really when a tear down happens, when a house is torn down, what can be replaced for it. The current scale of that, give or take, it's about 200 units a year. On average, that's out of about 130,000.
About 180,000 single family.
180,000 single family homes. So about 200 of those. They're actually disproportionately on the western side of the county, although we're seeing more and more on the eastern part of the county that Lisa Gavoni, the housing resident expert in planning, has spoke about before. So, that is really the scale that we're talking about. Would that number increase? Probably. The extent of it, the increase, probably not orders of magnitude of 100 times. This was a similar dynamic when we took up accessory dwelling units. There was a fairly small number of accessory dwelling units. We made it easier to build accessory dwelling units. We've seen accessory dwelling units happen, but they haven't happened anywhere near the scale that those who really wanted them wanted to see, and those who really didn't want them didn't want to see. They have been implemented, but they've been implemented, slowly. And, I think as you've heard from Director Sartori, the expectation would be the implementation here would be relatively slow as well.
Councilmember Friedson, you stole my question, and it is about accessory dwelling units. We went through this whole kerfuffle, 2 or 3 years ago, about loosening the requirements for accessory dwelling units. And we have a lot of them in my community. We have many two-family homes. But unfortunately, there has been little, if any, really follow-up, either by planning to really see what that is, or by housing to ensure that they are properly licensed. Most of the accessory dwelling units, the basement apartments in this county, are not licensed. And I doubt that the county actually knows how many accessory apartments exist. I can tell you that garages, standalone garages, have been turned into full houses. I can show you a house on New Hampshire Avenue that has 2 houses on a single family lot that permitting and housing and planning decided to do nothing about. So I think you do need to take a look at the accessory dwelling issue and do a little deep dive. As Mr. Sartori said, you're going to look at this in 2 or 3 years after you implement the attainable housing changes. Well, you need to take a look now at what happened and what the status is on accessory dwelling units. I have one other little small pitiful point, and that is homes that are not connected to WSSC sewer. And you would be surprised, in zip code 20903, which is just south of here, there are single-family homes on modest lots that were built in the 50s that are on septic tanks. And so, yeah, and there are bigger homes on big lots that are on septic, but they can handle it. So you need to take a look at some of the details to this proposal to make sure that the lot infrastructure can handle the additional density. We had one home in my neighborhood that they had an illegal accessory apartment at the time. They had a sewer problem. They broke open the septic tank, put a hose to it, and let a hose go down into the stormwater system. So you have really some interesting issues, and that's in the weeds. That's not a common issue, but some of the things in the weeds are really stressful.
You refer to it as a pitiful issue. I'm glad you didn't use other language for that. A couple things. We did have a follow-up conversation at the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee specifically on accessory dwelling units. That is something that we have pushed for follow-up. The main change of the last change that we made was about detached units, not about attached units, which already were allowed, and we didn't make a whole lot of changes to that. The real significant changes were the detached unit. If you have an in-law suite or a backyard cottage, there are lots of names for these units. And our goal is to bring as many of them into the regulatory regime as possible, because most of the ADU units up to the point at which we had taken them up weren't regulated. And that is a challenge. If you have specific concerns about specific ADUs in your neighborhood, in your community, please reach out to us, and we're happy to get permitting or Department of Housing and Community Affairs to come out and check. If something is operating and is not licensed, we should be aware of it and we should be addressing it. That has been a challenge. But we're happy to follow up with our executive branch partners on that to the extent that we can. On the water sewer hookup question, and particularly the sewer question, that is an issue that we're going to have to take up. There are lots around the county that are are on septic, and that is an infrastructure question that we're going to have to take up as part of the broader infrastructure questions that have been raised here tonight and that we've heard from others about.
Hi, my name is Cherie Branson. I'm the 3rd Vice President of the Montgomery County NAACP. I'm here speaking for myself and not the NAACP. I live in zip code 20905. Let me just say this first of all. The housing problem is not going to be fixed by zoning. It's going to be fixed by policy, right? You said earlier, Director Sartori, that there were 35,000 ready to go things on the books, right, have been approved. And yet it's unclear whether and how many of those housing projects are even still viable. Number one, go back and fix that. That's number one. Number two, that problem of housing is about affordability and access. There's absolutely nothing in this plan that indicates that anything built here will be affordable. I have not heard one word, one promise that that will occur. Number 3, I live in 20905. This is a historically non-white area out here, right? The displacement probability is real. Most of my neighbors are in their 80s. I know that their children do not live in this area. If this goes through, I'm going to be surrounded by duplexes because they're going to sell those houses and it's over for me. You have devalued my property in that way. Number 3, the county housing policy cannot focus only on zoning. Affordability, accessibility. Right now, the county housing policy seems to ask the question, can we put people in places? How about instead asking, can we put people in ownership? Because building apartments that are unaffordable for most folks does not create wealth. It does not give them a foothold so that they can actually get a house later. It does none of that. And finally, and I promise you this will be my final point, we in this county provide minimal down payment assistance for first-time buyers. You want to fix first-time buyer, you want to make it real for people to buy property in this county? Stop giving money to the developers and give the money to the people. That will assure that people will get in homes. In DC, you can get like up to $200,000 for a first time. In Montgomery County, I think you can get $25K. Oh, good luck with that. So those are my issues. Please do not put me out of my lovely home in Maydale. And because if you do this, I promise you, you will destroy my quality of life. You will destroy my community. It will have been a taking. And it will not have benefited anyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. So I speak as somebody who was born and raised in this county, born in a quadplex, actually, in Tacoma Park. Also lived in an apartment, high-rise apartment in Rockville, have family members who own condos and single families and townhomes, and my parents are a handful amount of years away from paying off that mortgage, thank God. I recognize that you're not gonna make everybody happy. Like realistically, I'm in my mid-30s, I'm also a public servant, it is hard work. But I appreciate the efforts, or at least the thoughtfulness of trying to make sure that people who, like me, mid-30s, trying to have a baby, have older parents who are retired, who actually use this senior center every single day. That would be her. Who would love to send my kids to Montgomery County Public Schools, who also need to care for my very aging parents and really don't want to move out to like Anne Arundel County or whatever's happening north of Gaithersburg. I get that it's hard, but I really, really appreciate the thoughts. I would love to live here indefinitely. I'm disgusted with the fact that I don't even work here anymore. But as much as we want to keep the character of our neighborhoods, again, born and raised East County, love East County, at a certain point, something has to give and people want to live here and we should make it, she said everything, she's going. She said everything very eloquently about a down payment assistant that I was just gonna yell and cuss at y'all about. But making this more affordable and making it more accessible and making more units really makes a difference for people like me who don't want to move my mom into a county where she has no friends and no family and away from the church and where we've been since the 70s. That doesn't make sense.
Thank you for your comments.
While Marcella's coming across the room, we do down payment assistance in Montgomery County. It isn't nearly as much as I wish it were. I did advocate and the council did approve significant increases, several $1 million more for that program, but it's not nearly enough given the pricing that you saw up there, and it is oversubscribed, as you can imagine, given the magnitude of the challenges that we face.
Thank you for your time, Councilman. I did have one question and one thing I did want to reiterate. So first and foremost, I think one point that was echoed a lot in this meeting was that the worst thing we can do here is nothing. And so I can appreciate this council's sense of urgency and agency in solving this issue. So thank you for that, which brings me to my question. So one topic you heard a lot here was traffic. Putting new cars on the road is going to increase the amount of traffic we see. And even if we don't build houses, they're going to build houses in Frederick and they'll use our utilities and they don't even pay taxpayer money. So that's even worse for us and worse for our traffic. But going back to Montgomery County, one of the things I was raised in Damascus, then Laytonsville, and now I live in Silver Spring. And just even to get a carton of eggs, it's always been at least a 20-minute drive. So my question was going to be, are there any plans in the mix or down the road to integrate mixed-use communities and mixed-use districts so that maybe I don't have to get into my car to go pick up that carton of eggs? Maybe I can walk to the corner.
I appreciate it. I think Director Sartori is probably going to talk about complete communities, our emphasis on that. That was one of the core tenets of the Thrive 2050 plan that we adopted. Our vision, our goal is at a scale that is appropriate and that makes sense for the part of the county that it's in and the dynamics of that county, that you would, within 15 minutes of where you live, that could be walking if you're in a very urban area, that could be driving if you're in a more suburban or rural area, that you would be able to carry out your everyday activities. That means going to the grocery store, that means going to the dry cleaners, that means grabbing a cup of coffee, grabbing a bite to eat. So that is the vision, that is the goal. Obviously, there's a lot of room in many parts of the county in order to get there, but that is what we are attempting to move forward with and what we envision to do. And that's what each master plan tries to move the implementation towards.
Hi, my name's Dara Siegel. I'm a resident of Four Corners. I live right by one of those transit corridors that's open for small apartment buildings. Hi, good to see you again. I'm also expecting my first child this February. I'm really excited. This county has given me so much. The state has given me so much. I'm not a native, but I hope to live here indefinitely, as a previous speaker said. And we have to make that possible. I don't want to pull the ladder up behind me. I was able to purchase a home here in this county. I don't want to take that opportunity away from other people. We need more options and more attainability in our county. And we just spoke about down payment assistance. We could have infinite down payment assistance. It doesn't matter if there's no house you can buy. It doesn't matter if there aren't enough units. We're gonna maintain the same generational wealth inequality that we have now if we don't build enough. Obviously, I'm passionate about this. I really appreciate what you're doing and that you're taking the time to listen to us, but I also think it's time to stop listening and it's time to do something. We are far past the point of doing studies and conducting community engagement with people who aren't gonna be here in 30 to 40 years. It's time to move forward. How long are you gonna be here?
All right, let's try to remain civil. Congratulations to you and your baby. Let's try to remain civil. Folks, we're here for a civil dialogue, please. Let's go to the next question or comment.
Can you stand up, please?
You don't need to stand if you prefer not to.
All right, I'm going to sit. My name is Carol Jones. I've lived in the county for 32 years, downtown Silver Spring. As an environmental economist, I understand it makes perfect sense that we have increased density around transportation nodes, which will have potentially a very deleterious impact on my particular neighborhood. But what I want to do is amplify the concerns expressed earlier about the impact on the environment and on the trees and taking us backward in terms of the county's climate action goals. In particular, I would like the county to put in place policies to protect trees in the residential zone before we move forward with a program like this. The county recognizes that low tree cover in the central business district is having very deleterious effect in terms of heat islands, health impacts, impacts on air and water quality. It's 8% tree cover in the CBD in downtown Silver Spring compared to 18, 19% in Bethesda and some other places. It's also a tremendous decrease in tree cover in the residential areas that are abutting the area. And it's important to recognize, several people have said, well, we're not changing the amount of lot that can be covered by a building, okay? It's 35% in R60, right? But currently, in my neighborhood, the actual lot coverage is 10 to 11%. So we're talking about a tripling of the lot that's covered, and that is not including, according to planning folks we have spoken with, that is not including the requirement for parking on the land. So you're having an incredible increase in impermeable surfaces, and you're going to be taking down trees in the neighborhoods, and we have no policies in the county that restrict that or require mitigation, planting of trees elsewhere. So I think it's really important that we have those environmental policies in place. Thank you.
Appreciate the comments. I just want to say we have done a lot on forest conservation and on tree canopy. There's a lot more we can do, and I agree with you on that. Silver Spring, we're extremely aggressive in the master plan for that to address the urban heat island there. Fairland Brick, well, you mentioned it, so I'm trying to respond to it. Fairland Bricks Cheney, the plan that we just took up in East County, we were aggressive in the tree canopy, tree cover standards there, as aggressive as anywhere has been on those issues. We recently updated forest conservation laws. We've worked together with state partners as well on forest conservation law, as well as doing it at the county level to require a higher replacement. And he was here earlier. I'm not sure if he's still here, but Councilmember Glass and I worked on increasing the fees for when you do take down a tree. We can't always stop somebody on private property from taking down a tree, or when a tree gets taken down in a public right-of-way, but there are replacement costs for that. Historically, those replacement costs had not increased with the actual cost that had gone up, and we increased those fees to what it actually costs to replace those fees to try to address those issues. So I just wanted to make sure that I responded to, we're not doing anything. We are doing many things, but I think we can agree that there's more we can do.
Hi, I'm a homeowner in the county, and I wanted to come tonight to point out that this is offering some options that includes benefits to homeowners like myself. For example, if throughout my life, as my needs change, I can change the use of my own property if I need it for financial reasons, to help stabilize my family, to help stabilize my parents, whatever that might be. And also that I have multiple Gen Z nieces and nephews around here who are absolutely nowhere near being able to buy a house. I'm not sure that they'll ever be able to buy a house in this county. And it's looking like all of them will end up being part of this flight from the county of people who can't afford to be here. So for the purpose of this session, how is the current zoning schema helping us in this housing crisis, or how is it hurting us? If you look at who the beneficiaries are of the current zoning schema, that is people who are homeowners, small developers, or private equity, all of whom have either an investment or a profit motive. And why do more people want to be homeowners? Because it's the best way in this country to achieve financial stability for yourself and create generational wealth for your own family. And I don't really see how the arbitrary nature of a zoning schema made decades ago should remain in place when it's so harmful to so many people. It's so exclusionary to so many people. And there are many ways that we can alter it that we just have to start actually doing to see a benefit, because it's it's preventing us from making progress, and I don't see anyone standing up and saying why they think it's such a great zoning schema. So let's change it and make it better and actually get something done. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next person.
Hi, yes, I'm a homeowner. I am not from this area. Prior to here, I've lived in Houston, where they have overdeveloped, and you have seen what has happened, the flooding that occurs in Houston on a now regular basis. I've lived in Atlanta. They have overdeveloped. They've overdeveloped in some areas. I still have friends and family in the area. And basically their property, the value isn't increasing as much as they would like because the type of homes that are in their neighborhoods. And I'm afraid that, down the road, it sounds all, well and good, but we're debating, whether to leave or whether to add on to our home. But what's going on now, I don't even think I want to invest in, any more into my home than I already have, because am I going to lose value, in 5-10 years from now based off of what type of homes are in my community now? And I have small children, and I don't feel safe, especially if they're rental properties. I will not feel safe. I feel comfortable. I know all of my neighbors. We share each other's vegetables. We cook for each other. We carpool. We do everything. But if you change that, then I don't have that peace of mind with my children or, people who come after me. They won't have that peace of mind. And I just don't think it's being well thought about.
Appreciate your
Thank
feedback.
you for your comments. Next person.
Hi, I'm Paul Morawski. I've been in the county for 35 years or so. And one of the common threads I think I'm hearing here, no, I know I'm hearing, is that these older communities in which many of us live were not conceived of or designed to have additional density bolted on top of them 50 or 70 years later. The infrastructure's not there, and it's like you can't get there from here situation. People have been talking about, parking, electricity. The one thing, well, actually somebody finally mentioned was sewage. We just went through a very painful and nasty restoration of the sewers in Northwest Branch that was mandated by the Environmental Protection Agency because it was such a mess. And you're talking about putting, 20 or 30% more people into that system without, and what are you going to do? Dig up every street in lower Montgomery County to do something that wasn't conceived of 50 years ago when these neighborhoods were developed? It's kind of thoughtless from my perspective. It just doesn't make sense. I don't see how you can call it planning. It's not planning. It's like we're going to ignore certain things, and you just got to accept it. These houses are there, and the infrastructure's not.
Appreciate it. As I mentioned, infrastructures are coming up quite a bit. Let's take 2 more over here and 2 more here, and then I think we have to call it. We told the staff at the Recreation Department that we would be out of here by 9, and they still have to help us clean up the chairs and get out of here.
Good evening, Councilmember Friedson. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for the County Council to looking into an issue that's not just a Montgomery County issue alone. I want to, and also want to mention that I've been a resident of the county for over 35 years. I want to bring up something bring up something that was mentioned by Jeremiah Pope as well as the Reverend in the back. A week or 2 ago, I don't quite remember, but I was in this exact room listening to the listening session or the forum for the budget. And there was a room full of Afghans that are not here today. So who were being evicted, unfortunately. And we know that between 2043 to about 2045, our country is going to be majority minority. And if we have immigrants in our neighborhood right now that can't afford the current housing, how is this plan going to help them? And this is speaking for a group of individuals or individuals that are not represented in the room. While I am the chair of the African American Advisory Group, I'm here because I'm a resident of 20904, but I also want to bring up light. And just my question then is this planning strategy keeping in mind those individuals, immigrants, Black and brown folks who are struggling with the current being able to afford what's already here? And we're looking to build and add on to make additional room, but the individuals are here, can't even afford what they're already in. So I guess my question is, are we looking at those who are here in the housing situation? Because if they're kicked out, then we have additional units that we're looking to fill that still doesn't solve the pricing issue or the affordability issue. Thank you.
Appreciate that. I could give Jason a second to respond, but essentially there's a big gap between owning an existing single-family home within the current single-family home regulatory regime that exists and being able to afford anything in Montgomery County that gives you shelter and a home and stability. We have huge challenges at every aspect of that spectrum, from rent burden and rental challenges to first-time home buyer and access to home ownership, which provides generational wealth and the ability to stay in housing. If you look at the Black home ownership numbers, which I know you're acutely concerned about, as am I, we have an issue not only of gaining and obtaining or home ownership opportunities, a way to generate generational wealth, but actually losing people and families who had access to generational wealth building and are selling it in order to survive, and their families are now no longer homeowners. We have tried our best to tackle each part of that. There are things that we've done and programs that we've done to add more funding to programs that help those at risk of losing their homes to stay in their home, to make accessibility changes so that they can meet their physical needs, to update their homes in many ways. They don't have to sell their homes. As I mentioned, we've expanded our home ownership opportunities. We're doing a tremendous amount on the renter side. I will say it's easier at the county level to address the rental side because the federal government almost exclusively helps on that side, and it's hard for us, given the orders of magnitude, to get in. This is a piece of that, but this is really about, if you are a homeowner, what happens to your home if the unit gets knocked down? Or if you are a prospective homeowner, what are the units that are available to you in a residential neighborhood? At a high level, that's essentially what we're talking about, which is just one piece of one part of what is a much bigger challenge, and no policy and no issue is going to solve all of it. Actually, no issue is really going to solve an entire part of even one small piece of it. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. All right, next question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. My name is Ellen Mann. I'm from Cloverly, and like Dr. Seuss, I speak for the trees. I heard one person mention trees. I have seen very little in the material I read from you, Planning Board, about taking care of trees. And it's not just street trees, it's forests. If we want to conquer climate change, if we want to be able to, if we want our homes and these buildings that we're trying to build to survive, we have to take care of climate change. And one of the big issues is to protect the forests. Now, the previous Planning Board made a huge mistake when they allowed a mammoth nonprofit to build in Cloverly on 15 acres of old forest. That nonprofit destroyed 8 of those acres, and that forest lies at the headwaters of the Northwest Branch. as you may well know, the Northwest Branch has produced flooding in previous years. Especially this month, 4 years ago, there was a giant flood on 29. Maryland DOT had to close down the road. If we don't take care of these forests, then we are really in trouble. And by the way, this place, at 15,730 New Hampshire Avenue, before you make another move, you go out there and look at that. I want you to see what's happening. It's horrible, and it's going to flood. So take care of that first. The second thing I have to say is this. In no way should we ever agree to make developers tax exempt. No way ever. Listen, you talk about helping the middle income and the lower income. If you make these exemptions, somebody's going to pay for it. And you know who that's going to be? It's going to be us, all of us. And the poor people are going to suffer worse. So tell you what, you pay attention to climate change, and you do not give exemptions to wealthy developers. Taking from the poor and giving to the rich, it really doesn't make much sense at all.
Thank you for your feedback.
My 2 cents.
We're gonna
Thank you. 2 more questions.
very
and
quick questions and 2 very quick questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. I did want to acknowledge that Craig Wilson is here on behalf of Councilmember Balcom, and Michelle Whitaker, the Chief of Staff to Councilmember Jawando, is here as well. And I think Joseph, do I see in the back, on behalf of Lorianne Sales.
I want to say thank you for the opportunity for all of us to give our input. My concern is when you talk about these areas that we live in, you're talking about our quality of life. And also you talk about how I try to build generational wealth. But when you build some kind of home or duplex or triplex, whatever you're calling them, next door to me, if that should happen, my house value could go down. So have you thought about what that impact would be on those of us who have worked very hard to live in a home, to get generational wealth for their families? Because I didn't come from a rich family. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and I moved to Montgomery County to move to a better area for quality of life. But if you take away my opportunity to build my wealth, I will have to leave, because I'm not going to have my house value go down or because of something built next door or in my neighborhood. I would have to leave before that happens. I hope that you put this particular issue on the ballot. And I think you also need to do other studies. We need to hear your other ideas, because this one has a lot of concerning areas in it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Have
you.
there been any analysis or studies at the planning department on the impact of zoning changes and allowing more uses in residential neighborhoods on the property values?
We did have some communication with the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. And one of the things they talked about was just in terms of property assessments, they don't compare single-family homes to other types of properties. So I understand what you're saying is a little different. It's about your perception of the value of your home if your neighbor built something that's different than yours. There's also value in communities that are able to have more people of different means and different experiences. And so that's what we're hoping to be able to accomplish, to allow more people to achieve what you've been able to achieve, being able to afford to live in your neighborhood and other neighborhoods.
And this is going to be our last question for the evening.
Thank you. My name is Michael Larkin. I'm a renter in Silver Spring, and I'm glad I took the flash bus here tonight. It was a great ride. And I want everyone to be able in Montgomery County to take advantage of a great opportunity like that. I myself, although not originally from this county, I come from a neighborhood that had diverse housing types, mixed incomes, firefighters, teachers, police officers, EMS. Some of my own family members work in those jobs. We have many first-time immigrants who moved into a neighborhood where I'm from, all because, not all because, but great deal because we have diverse housing types, condos, duplexes, triplexes, also single-family houses, row houses. All these housing options were available. Because they were available, people could start their lives. And I would just encourage the council to think about, in a little while, a couple of years from now, you're going to have the East Campus of Montgomery College here. When we want the graduates of that college to possibly be able to live in this neighborhood or closer, when we want them to take advantage of this BRT line that I hope we finish building and build it well, I would hope that the council would think about that and yes, pass a plan that would allow us to build denser, more compactly so we could have more neighbors. And neighbors are good. And your neighbor who lives in a duplex or a quadplex could be just as friendly as the person who lives in a house. How do I know? I come from that neighborhood. And that neighborhood included public housing. I know this plan doesn't necessarily deal with that, but all housing types together can coexist, be neighborly, be friendly. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you to everyone for coming. We obviously got a diversity of viewpoints here. That was the whole idea. As I mentioned, Logan from the council staff took down notes, as has my staff. Want to thank Marcella for dutifully walking around and getting your feedback, the PIO team, the council staff, the planning staff. You can reach out to us with any additional feedback that you have. Thank you, be safe, and have a good evening.